In this captivating story, Strangers in Marriage, we follow Emenike, a man caught between tradition and his personal desires. After the tragic death of his brother, Emenike is expected to marry his late brother's widow, Chioma, and take on the family's responsibilities. As he navigates family pressures, personal dreams, and his evolving relationship with Chioma, Emenike embarks on a journey of self-discovery. Will he choose freedom or family? Watch as Emenike battles his internal conflict and the ties that bind him, seeking balance in love, duty, and the pursuit of his dreams. No one could have guessed what was going on in Emenike's mind as he sat on the chair, facing Motsi Aku, Motsi Okafor, Motsi Oji, and Uncle Obiora. His mother was present, silent but observing, her expression unreadable. To Emenike, it felt like Judgment Day, as though he were standing before the throne of God. It is your duty, Emenike. You cannot just run away from it, Motsi Oji declared, his voice tinged with an awkward English that grated on Emenike's nerves. My son, we hear, actually, your mother told us, that you do not want this responsibility, Motsi Aku, who seemed more educated, cut in. And he was right. Emenike did not want this responsibility. He had dreams that would be crushed under the weight of such a burden. Emenike Nubisai was the second son of the late Motsi Nubisai, born to his fourth wife. His father had 7 wives but only 2 sons, one from his second wife, and Emenike, from his fourth. His father had been a well-known trader, one of the first to deal with white men, earning him great wealth. His relentless pursuit of sons had filled his house with wives, but his wish for many male heirs had gone mostly unfulfilled. His father passed away at an old age, leaving half his wealth to Dike, his first son, while the rest was shared among his daughters and Emenike. Dike, however, died tragically in a car accident earlier in the year, while traveling to deliver a speech at a conference in Abuja. After Dike's burial, the elders had requested that his widow, Chioma, bring all of his documents and move into the family house with her children, a boy and 2 girls. She was to live with her mother-in-law until her fate was decided. As tradition dictated, Emenike was now expected to take over everything Dike had left behind, including his wife, Chioma, who was considered part of his estate. But Emenike had no desire to claim any of it, least of all his late brother's wife. Son, we know you're still mourning your brother, but you cannot mourn him forever. It's been 4 months now, Motsi Okafor spoke with firm resolve. It's time you take over his family and businesses. As his only surviving brother, all that he had is now yours to take, Motsi Aku added. Emenike inhaled deeply, trying to gather his thoughts. My son, what they are saying is that everything your brother ever had is now yours, including his wife, Uncle Obiora clarified, his tone more gentle, trying to ease the blow. I understand exactly what they are saying, Uncle, Emenike replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside. Thank you all for your concern and for coming here today. I loved my brother, and his family is mine, but I cannot take over his business, and I will not marry his wife. The elders exchanged knowing glances and murmured among themselves. Motsi Aku cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Emenike, we know this is a heavy burden, but you have no choice. I disagree, Emenike said, his voice sharp with restrained frustration. I do have a choice. Chioma is a graduate of economics from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. She is more than capable of managing my brother's businesses. He left behind a son and 2 daughters. Why should I step in when his own children are still alive? My son, she's just a woman, Motsi Oji interjected, his tone dismissive. What do women know about running a business? If the problem is marriage, you can wed her in the church. Yes, the church. Motsi Okafor chimed in, nodding. That's what you young people prefer nowadays, isn't it? Getting married in the church isn't the issue, Emenike responded, barely containing his exasperation. What if I've already promised to marry someone else? Do I go back and tell her I can't marry her because I'm now marrying my late brother's wife? The elders smiled, their expressions conveying a confidence that unsettled Emenike. That's no problem. If you have someone else, you can marry her too. Chioma can be your second wife, Motsi Okafor suggested, as though this solution were the most logical thing in the world. Motsi Aku stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "We leave you to think it over, my son." That night, Emenike found himself caught in a storm of doubt. His lifelong dream of traveling the world now seemed to be slipping through his fingers. His mother's words echoed relentlessly in his mind. "If you don't marry her, she'll be passed to the next able male in the family. And that will be Uncle Obiora. Do you want Chioma and the children to suffer? Do this for your late brother. Protect his children. If Chioma marries outside the family and something happens to her, God forbid, everything your brother worked for will end up in another man's hands." Then there was Chioma. Her voice echoed in his dreams, pleading with him. "Emenike, we used to be friends. I don't like this situation any more than you do, but for the sake of my children, please marry me. I won't ask anything of you, I promise. You can keep traveling the world, I have found your travels, just don't let them take everything from us." It was a long, sleepless night. Emenike's mind wrestled with the expectations of his family, tradition, and his own desires. Slowly, the logic of the elders' arguments began to sink in. If Chioma were given her freedom, she would eventually remarry, and the new husband would inherit part of what Dyke left behind. And if something happened to Chioma, what would become of the children? Then there was Uncle Obiora. He would happily take everything, but Emenike knew his niece and nephews would suffer under his care. This wasn't the life Emenike had envisioned for himself. But, as the saying goes, man proposes, and God disposes. The next morning, Emenike had a private discussion with Chioma. After much deliberation, they both agreed to move forward with the marriage. They would take things one step at a time. Uncle Obiora, clearly displeased with Emenike's decision, had hoped to inherit everything. But Emenike's mother was overjoyed. A few weeks later, Emenike and Chioma had a quiet court wedding, and they moved back to Ibadan. Emenike did not love Chioma, and he didn't know what the future held for them. But for his brother, and for the family Dyke had left behind, Emenike was willing to make the sacrifice. Emenike's life in Ibadan felt far from what he had always imagined. The quiet town, though bustling in its own way, was a stark contrast to the fast-paced life he had envisioned for himself, one where he would explore distant countries and immerse himself in diverse cultures. Instead, he was now bound by tradition, married to his brother's widow, Chioma, with a family to care for that wasn't even his own. His days became monotonous, revolving around managing the businesses Dyke had left behind. Chioma had initially offered to run the businesses herself, as she had the education and capability. But despite Emenike's initial support, the constant reminders from the elders that a woman shouldn't handle such matters alone had put pressure on him to stay involved. Chioma, for her part, kept her word. She didn't ask much from him, respecting the boundaries they had set. She busied herself with the children and took a back seat in the business, though Emenike could tell she often felt stifled. Her intelligence and strength were evident in the way she managed the household, the children's education, and the business accounts, even when Emenike insisted on being the figurehead. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Chioma approached Emenike in the living room. "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about," she began, her voice soft yet steady. Emenike looked up from his paperwork, raising an eyebrow. "What is it?" "I know we agreed to this arrangement for the sake of the children and the family. And I've kept my promise. But I can't help feeling like we are both trapped." Emenike sighed. He knew where this conversation was headed, and part of him dreaded it. "Chioma, we've already talked about this. I know it's not what either of us wanted, but it's the best option for the family." "Yes, but what about us? We are living like strangers in the same house. We barely talk, we barely interact." "It's been months, Emenike," Chioma pressed, her eyes searching his face for any sign of emotion. "I never promised to love you, Chioma," Emenike said quietly, averting his gaze. "You know that. This marriage was never about us." Chioma nodded, her expression unreadable. "I know. But it doesn't change the fact that we are living like ghosts. The children are starting to notice. They ask why we don't spend time together as a family. And I don't know how much longer I can keep telling them everything is fine. Emenike felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't considered how the children were perceiving their strained relationship. He had been so focused on fulfilling his obligations that he hadn't realized the impact it was having on those around him. "I'll try," he finally said, though the words felt hollow. "I'll try to make more of an effort." Chioma gave a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "That's all I'm asking for." The conversation left Emenike feeling unsettled. He had made the sacrifice for his brother's family, but now he was beginning to wonder if the cost was higher than he had anticipated. He had always been a free spirit, someone who valued independence and adventure. Now, he felt like a bird in a cage, his wings clipped by duty and tradition. As the days went by, Emenike tried to fulfill his promise to Chioma. He spent more time with the children, taking them to the park and helping with their homework. He even joined them for family dinners, something he had previously avoided. But despite his efforts, the emotional distance between him and Chioma remained. They were cordial, but there was no warmth, no connection. It was as if they were living in parallel worlds, each going through the motions but never truly meeting. One afternoon, while Emenike was in the office, he received a call from an old friend, Chidi. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Emenike had moved to Ibadan to take over Dyke's responsibilities. Chidi had been one of the few people who truly understood Emenike's desire for freedom and adventure. "Emenike, my man. Long time no see," Chidi's voice boomed through the phone, full of the energy Emenike had once shared. "Chidi, it's been too long," Emenike replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "How's life treating you?" "Oh, you know me, always on the move. Just got back from Kenya. You wouldn't believe the things I've seen, man. You should have been there. We climbed Mount Kilimanjaro last month, and I thought of you the entire time. Remember how we always talked about doing that?" Emenike's heart sank. He had once dreamed of such adventures, but those dreams felt distant now, almost like they belonged to someone else. "Yeah, I remember," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "What happened to you, Emenike? You used to be the guy who couldn't stay in one place for more than a few months. Now, it's like you've disappeared off the face of the earth." "I guess life happened," Emenike replied, not knowing how to explain the complexities of his situation. Chidi's voice softened. "Look, man, I get it. Life takes unexpected turns sometimes. But don't let it swallow you whole. You're too young to give up on your dreams." Emenike leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Chidi's words hit harder than he expected. Had he given up on his dreams? Or had he simply accepted a reality that wasn't his own? "I think about it," Emenike finally said, though deep down, he wasn't sure what there was to think about. After the call, Emenike sat in silence, lost in thought. Chidi's words echoed in his mind, stirring something within him that had long been dormant. For the first time in months, Emenike began to question whether the life he was living was truly his own or just the one he had been forced into. Weeks passed, and the routine continued. Emenike kept his promise to Chioma, spending more time with the children and trying to make the marriage work in the eyes of the family. But something inside him was shifting. The conversation with Chidi had sparked a restlessness that he couldn't shake. His mind wandered to the life he could have had, the one filled with adventure, travel, and freedom. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Emenike found himself sitting alone in the living room. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. He glanced at the bookshelf, his eyes landing on a framed photo of Dyke and Chioma on their wedding day. They looked so happy, so full of life. It was a stark contrast to the hollow existence Emenike now found himself in. Suddenly, Chioma appeared in the doorway, her eyes tired but curious. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, breaking the silence. Emenike hesitated, unsure how to put his thoughts into words. "I've been thinking about us," he finally said. "You said?" Chioma stepped into the room, folding her arms as she leaned against the wall. "About us. Or about what we've become?" Emenike sighed, rubbing his temples. Both, I suppose. I know this isn't what you wanted, Chioma. It's not what I wanted either, but we're here now. And I've been trying to make it work. I know you have, Emenike. And I appreciate it. But you and I both know that effort without heart isn't enough. She walked closer and sat on the chair opposite him, her voice soft but firm. I see it in your eyes. You're not happy. You don't want to be here. Emenike didn't respond immediately, but the weight of her words pressed down on him. It was true. As much as he tried to make the situation bearable, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was trapped in a life that didn't belong to him. Do you think I enjoy this either? Chioma's voice broke his thoughts. Every day, I wake up and put on a brave face for the children. I smile, I do my duties, but inside, I'm as lost as you are. Emenike stared at her, realizing for the first time that Chioma wasn't just enduring this marriage, she was suffering too. I didn't know you felt that way. Chioma gave a small, bitter laugh. Why would you? We don't talk about these things. We've been too busy pretending that everything is fine. Because it's what's expected of us. Her words cut deep, and Emenike felt a pang of guilt. For months, he had seen her as an obstacle to his freedom, a symbol of the life he had been forced into. But now, sitting across from her, he saw that she was just as trapped as he was. What do we do then? Emenike asked quietly. How do we make this right? Chioma took a deep breath, her eyes searching his face. I don't know. But what I do know is that we can't keep living like this. Not for the children, and not for ourselves. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. The quiet tension between them felt heavier than ever, as if the air itself was weighed down by the things left unsaid. Finally, Chioma spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we need time. Time to figure out what we really want. You've sacrificed a lot for this family, Emenike, but you can't lose yourself in the process. Emenike nodded slowly, appreciating her words more than she probably knew. And you, Chioma? What do you want? She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. I want a chance to live again. To stop being defined by this tragedy. Dyke's death, it took everything from me. I want to feel like my own person again. Emenike's heart softened at her vulnerability. He hadn't realized how much she had been holding back, how much of her own pain had been hidden beneath the surface. I think we both need that, Emenike admitted. But how do we get there? I'm not sure, Chioma replied. But I know it starts with being honest, with ourselves and with each other. They sat in that shared moment of understanding, acknowledging the weight of their situation but also the possibility of change. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since Dyke's death, there was a glimmer of hope, a small spark that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way out of the shadows that had consumed them both. Over the next few weeks, Emenike and Chioma began to shift their approach to their shared life. The unspoken rules that had once governed their interactions started to loosen, and they began to communicate more openly. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was a start. Chioma, encouraged by their conversations, started taking a more active role in the family businesses. Despite the elders' insistence that a woman couldn't manage on her own, Emenike supported her decision to get involved. He realized that allowing Chioma to take the reins wasn't just about giving her control over Dyke's legacy, it was about giving her the chance to reclaim her own life. One day, while going through some of Dyke's old business files, Chioma discovered something that took her by surprise. She found a letter from one of Dyke's close business partners, hinting at an investment opportunity that had been in the works before his death. It was a risky venture, but if it paid off, it could significantly increase the family's wealth. Excited by the possibility, Chioma approached Emenike with the news. I found something interesting today, she said, handing him the letter. It looks like Dyke was planning something big before he died. Emenike read through the letter, his brows furrowed in concentration. This could change everything, he muttered, glancing up at her. But it's a huge risk. I know, Chioma agreed. But I think it's worth considering. Dyke wouldn't have pursued this if he didn't believe in it. Emenike leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. What do you want to do? Chioma hesitated for a moment before speaking. I want to go for it. I know it's a gamble, but I think we can make it work. And it's something Dyke wanted to do. Emenike studied her face, seeing the determination in her eyes. She had been passive for so long, but now she was ready to take control, to honor her late husband's legacy while building something of her own. All right, he said finally. Let's do it. We'll take the risk. With that decision, Emenike and Chioma became partners in a way they hadn't expected. The investment became a shared project, something they could both focus on, and it breathed new life into their strained relationship. As they worked together, Emenike found himself admiring Chioma's intelligence and resourcefulness. She was a natural leader, and it became clear that she had the capability to manage the business just as well, if not better, than Dyke had. And for the first time, Emenike felt a sense of purpose in what he was doing, not just for the family, but for himself as well. But beneath the surface, Emenike still wrestled with his own desires. The more time he spent in Ibadan, the more he felt the pull of the life he had once dreamed of. The adventure, the freedom, it was all still there, just out of reach. And no matter how much he tried to convince himself that he had made peace with his choices, the restlessness in his heart never fully faded. One evening, after a long day of work, Emenike sat alone on the porch, staring out at the quiet street. The sun had set, and the sky was painted in shades of deep purple and orange. He felt a presence beside him and turned to see Chioma, her face calm but thoughtful. You're still thinking about it, aren't you? She asked softly. Emenike didn't need to ask what she meant. She had always been able to read him better than anyone else. Yeah, he admitted. It never really goes away. Chioma nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then maybe you need to stop running from it. Emenike looked at her, surprised by her words. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time you stopped sacrificing everything for everyone else. Maybe it's time you started living the life you've always wanted. Emenike stared at her, stunned. He had never expected Chioma to say something like that. But what about the family? The businesses? The children? We'll be fine, she said, her voice steady. I'm stronger than you think, Emenike. I can handle it. You don't have to stay here out of obligation. For the first time, Emenike saw Chioma not as his brother's widow or the burden he had been forced to bear, but as an independent woman capable of standing on her own. And in that moment, he realized that maybe he didn't have to be the martyr he had always believed he needed to be. I don't know what to say, Emenike whispered. You don't have to say anything, Chioma replied, her smile soft and understanding. Just go, Emenike. Find your freedom. We'll be okay. And for the first time in a long time, Emenike allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have it all. With Chioma's blessing, Emenike began to entertain the possibility of leaving Ibadan and pursuing the life he had always wanted. The pull toward adventure, toward reclaiming his dreams, grew stronger each day, but so did his sense of guilt. Would he be abandoning his family? Would he be running away from responsibility, or was this a chance to finally live authentically? He wrestled with these thoughts, trying to balance his desires with the obligations he had assumed. But Chioma's words had freed him in a way he hadn't anticipated. The decision was no longer about sacrifice, it was about choice. You said. As the days passed, Emenike's inner conflict grew. He knew that the time to make a decision was fast approaching. Every time he looked at the children, his heart twisted with guilt. Would they understand if he left? Would they feel abandoned? And what about Chioma? Even though she had given him her blessing, would she secretly resent him for leaving? One evening, after a long day at the office, Emenike came home to find Chioma sitting outside with a thoughtful expression on her face. She looked up as he approached, offering a small smile. I've been thinking a lot lately, she said as he sat down beside her. About what? Emenike asked, though he already had an idea. About everything. about us, the kids, the businesses, and your future. She paused, looking out into the distance. I meant what I said the other day. You don't owe anyone anything. You've done more than enough for this family, Emenike. He shook his head, feeling the weight of her words. I still feel like I'm abandoning you all. I don't know if I can live with that. Chioma turned to face him, her gaze firm but kind. You're not abandoning us. I'm capable, Emenike. The children are strong, and so am I. I want you to stop carrying this burden like it's the only thing keeping us together. We'll survive. I need you to believe that. Emenike felt a lump rise in his throat. For so long, he had viewed himself as the pillar holding the family together. He had believed that without him, everything would fall apart. But hearing Chioma's words, seeing the strength in her eyes, he began to realize that maybe, just maybe, the family could thrive without him. Have you thought about where you'd go? Chioma asked after a moment. Emenike sighed. I've always wanted to travel. I want to see the world, Africa, Europe, maybe even South America. There's so much out there, Chioma. So much I've been missing. Chioma smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. Then go. Live that life. Don't stay here out of duty or obligation. If you stay, let it be because it's what you truly want. Not because you think you have to. The following days were filled with quiet contemplation. Emenike found himself watching his children more closely, committing their faces, their laughter, and their personalities to memory. He cherished the moments spent with them, knowing that soon, his presence would be more like a distant echo. Chioma, for her part, continued to show him unwavering support. She took on more of the responsibilities at work, proving to both Emenike and the elders that she was more than capable of managing Dyke's legacy. She did so with grace, determination, and a quiet strength that made Emenike feel both proud and deeply conflicted. One afternoon, as he was preparing to go over some business files, Uncle Obiora paid an unexpected visit. Emenike hadn't seen his uncle in months, and the older man's presence immediately filled him with unease. Emenike, I hear you're planning something, Uncle Obiora said, his voice dripping with suspicion. Emenike bristled, knowing full well what his uncle was getting at. I'm thinking about leaving, yes. But everything is under control. Chioma has taken over the businesses, and the family is in good hands. Uncle Obiora scoffed, shaking his head. You young people think you know everything. Chioma may be capable, but she is still a woman. Do you think the elders will allow her to manage everything on her own? If you leave, they will challenge her authority. They can challenge all they want, Emenike replied, his tone sharper than intended. Chioma has proven herself. The elders can't deny her that. But they will, Uncle Obiora insisted. And when they do, they will look to me to step in. Emenike's stomach twisted. This was exactly what he had feared, his uncle's thinly veiled ambition to control what Dyke had left behind. That's not going to happen, Emenike said firmly. Uncle Obiora gave him a knowing look. We'll see. After his uncle left, Emenike found himself pacing, his mind racing. Could he really leave knowing that Uncle Obiora might try to take everything? Could Chioma fend off the elders on her own, or would she eventually be worn down by their relentless pressure? That night, Emenike confided his fears to Chioma. He told her about Uncle Obiora's visit, his veiled threats, and his concerns about the elders' reaction to her taking full control of the family's affairs. Chioma listened quietly before placing a hand on his arm. I know you're worried, Emenike. But you don't need to be. I've already spoken with the elders. They understand that this business isn't just Dyke's legacy, it's mine too. I helped him build it. And they respect that. But what if they change their minds? What if they won't, Chioma interrupted gently but firmly. I know how to handle them. You've done enough, Emenike. Let me take care of the rest. For the first time, Emenike truly believed her. Chioma wasn't just capable, she was ready. ready to step out of the shadow of her past and build a future for herself and her children. And that was when Emenike realized it was time. Time for him to finally let go of the past, to stop living out of obligation, and to reclaim the life he had once dreamed of. The day Emenike packed his bags felt surreal. The house was quiet, the children at school, and Chioma busy at work. He had delayed leaving for weeks, unsure of how to say goodbye or even if he truly could. But now, as he zipped up his suitcase, he knew there was no turning back. Chioma arrived home earlier than expected and found him in the living room, staring at his packed belongings. "So, this is it," she said softly. Emenike nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yeah, I guess it is." They stood in silence for a moment before Chioma stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a gentle embrace. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Emenike held her close, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "I should be the one thanking you," he murmured. "You've given me more than I could ever repay." They pulled apart, and Chioma offered him a sad smile. "You deserve to live your life, Emenike. Don't feel guilty for wanting that." "I'll visit," he promised, though they both knew it might be a long time before he returned. Chioma nodded. "We'll be waiting. But don't rush back for our sake. Go. Live. Be free." With one final look at the life he was leaving behind, Emenike picked up his suitcase and walked out the door. As he stepped onto the streets of Ibadan, a strange feeling washed over him, a mixture of sadness and relief. He was leaving behind the life he had been forced into, but he was also stepping into the unknown. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. As he boarded the bus that would take him to his first destination, Lagos, Emenike felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it felt like it was his own to decide. Chioma would be okay. The children would be okay. And now, finally, Emenike would be okay too. Lagos was everything Emenike had imagined, chaotic, vibrant, and alive with possibilities. He spent his first few weeks exploring the city, immersing himself in its culture and its people. For the first time in years, he felt truly free, untethered from the obligations that had once weighed him down. He made new friends, met fellow travelers, and even began sketching out plans for future journeys. From Lagos, he planned to travel to Accra, then perhaps on to Europe or even South America, as he had once dreamed. The world was finally open to him, and he intended to take full advantage. But despite the excitement of his new life, there was still a part of Emenike that felt unsettled. No matter how far he traveled, he couldn't escape the nagging sense that something was missing. Despite the freedom and excitement of Lagos, Emenike couldn't shake the feeling that a part of him was still tethered to his past. He would spend days exploring the bustling streets, sampling food from local vendors, and visiting museums, but every night, as he lay in his rented apartment, his mind wandered back to Ibadan, back to Chioma and the children. He thought about the life he had left behind, and though he knew he had made the right decision, a part of him still felt incomplete. One evening, while sitting in a cafe, Emenike received a call from Chidi. The two had stayed in touch since their last conversation, and Chidi's adventures had reignited Emenike's passion for travel. "Emenike, how's Lagos treating you?" Chidi's voice boomed through the phone. "It's been good, Chidi. Really good. But I've been thinking about moving on soon. Maybe head to Accra or somewhere else," Emenike replied, swirling his coffee absent-mindedly. "Accra's a great idea. I was just there last month. You'll love it. But hey, I've been meaning to ask, are you really happy? I mean, I know this is what you wanted, but sometimes I wonder." The question caught Emenike off guard. He had been asking himself the same thing for weeks now, but hearing it from Chidi made it feel more real. Was he truly happy? He had gained his freedom, but at what cost? "I don't know, Chidi," Emenike said after a pause. "I've got everything I wanted, but it doesn't feel like enough. There's this emptiness that I can't seem to fill." Chidi was silent for a moment before responding. "You left behind a lot, man. That kind of change isn't easy, even if it's what you thought you wanted. Maybe it's not about where you are, but what's still holding you back. Emenike's chest tightened. He knew Chidi was right. It wasn't just about the places he visited or the adventures he had, it was about the ties he still had to his family, to the life he had left behind. As much as he wanted to believe that he had moved on, the reality was that a part of him still belonged to Ebodon, to Chioma, and to the children. After the call ended, Emenike found himself staring out the window of the cafe, watching people pass by on the busy street. He felt like a spectator in his own life, disconnected from everything around him. The next morning, Emenike made a decision. He needed to return to Ebodon, if only for a short visit. He hadn't seen the children in months, and though he knew Chioma was managing just fine, there was a part of him that needed closure. He booked a bus ticket and within hours, he was on his way back. As the bus approached Ebodon, Emenike felt a mix of emotions, nervousness, anticipation, and something that felt like relief. He hadn't realized how much he missed the familiarity of the town until now. The winding roads, the vendors selling wares on the street corners, even the sounds of traffic brought back memories he hadn't expected to surface. When he arrived at the house, the children greeted him with excitement, their faces lighting up at the sight of him. Emenike's heart swelled as they hugged him, their innocence and joy washing away the doubts that had plagued him. "Daddy, when are you coming back for good?" his nephew asked, his small hands gripping Emenike's arm. Emenike hesitated, not knowing how to respond. He wasn't their father, but in their eyes, he had become a surrogate figure. The question hit harder than he expected, and he forced a smile. "I'm just here for a visit, but I'll always be around when you need me." Later that evening, Emenike and Chioma sat together on the porch. The silence between them was comfortable, but there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air. Chioma was the first to break it. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she said softly. "I wasn't sure if I should. I just needed to see everyone again," Emenike replied, glancing over at her. Chioma smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Emenike couldn't ignore. "You're always welcome here, Emenike. This will always be your home. I know. And I'm sorry if my leaving hurt you or the children. I didn't mean to abandon anyone." "You didn't abandon us," Chioma said, her voice gentle. "But I think you're still trying to figure out where you belong." Emenike nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. "I thought leaving would give me the freedom I wanted. But now I'm not so sure. I miss this place. I miss all of you." Chioma reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We miss you too, but you don't have to choose between freedom and family. You can have both." Emenike looked at her, confused. "How?" "You don't have to stay here forever, but you also don't have to disappear. You can travel, live your life, but still be a part of ours. The children need you, and so do I. But we also want you to be happy." Emenike stared at her, processing what she was saying. It wasn't the all-or-nothing choice he had believed it to be. He could still be part of their lives without giving up his own dreams. "I never thought of it that way," Emenike said, his voice barely above a whisper. Chioma smiled. "You don't have to sacrifice one for the other. You just need to find the balance." As they sat in the quiet night, the sounds of the town fading into the background, Emenike realized that maybe Chioma was right. Maybe he had been trying to make a choice that didn't need to be made. The next few days were filled with moments of clarity for Emenike. He spent time with the children, catching up on their lives and making up for the time he had been away. They laughed, played, and shared stories, and for the first time in a long time, Emenike felt like he was truly present, not just physically, but emotionally. Chioma continued to manage the businesses, proving herself more than capable of handling the responsibilities that had once weighed Emenike down. She thrived in her role, and Emenike couldn't help but admire her strength and determination. It was clear that she didn't need him to be there all the time, but she wanted him to be part of their lives, on his own terms. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Chioma brought up the subject that had been on Emenike's mind since his return. Have you thought about what you're going to do next? She asked. Emenike leaned back in his chair, staring up at the stars. I think I'm going to keep traveling. It's still something I need to do for myself. But I'll come back more often. I don't want to be a stranger to the children or to you. Chioma nodded, a small smile on her face. That's all I've ever wanted. For you to be part of our lives, even if you're not here all the time. I'll figure out a way to make it work, Emenike said, his voice filled with a sense of determination that hadn't been there before. I want to live the life I've always dreamed of, but I also want to be here for you and the kids. I don't know how I'll balance it, but I'm willing to try. Chioma reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. That's all we can ask for, Emenike. To try. And in that moment, Emenike felt something shift within him. The weight of obligation that had once pressed so heavily on his shoulders was lifting, replaced by a sense of purpose that felt more authentic than anything he had felt before. He didn't have to choose between freedom and family. He could have both, if he was willing to put in the effort. And for the first time, he felt ready to do just that. The following weeks were filled with a newfound sense of balance. Emenike made plans to continue his travels, but with the understanding that Ibadan was still his home, that Chioma and the children would always be a part of his life. He visited regularly, spending time with the family and ensuring that the businesses were running smoothly. He found joy in both his adventures and his connection to the people he loved. As the months passed, Emenike realized that the ties that bound him to his family didn't have to be a burden, they could be a source of strength. His relationship with Chioma grew stronger, built on mutual respect and understanding. They were no longer just tied together by duty but by choice. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Emenike turned to Chioma with a smile. I think I finally found my place. Chioma looked at him, her eyes filled with warmth. And where is that? Right here, Emenike replied, his voice steady. With you, with the kids. But also out there, exploring the world. I don't have to choose between the two anymore. Chioma smiled, her hand resting on his. I'm glad you finally see that. And as they sat in the quiet evening, the stars twinkling above them, Emenike felt a deep sense of peace. He had found the balance he had been searching for, and with it, he had found himself. The ties that once felt like chains were now the very things that anchored him, allowing him to live the life he had always dreamed of, free, yet connected to the people who mattered most. For Emenike, this was the life he had always wanted. A life of adventure, of purpose, and of love. A life where he didn't have to choose between his dreams and his family. A life where he could finally be whole. Months had passed since Emenike had found his balance between freedom and family. He continued to travel, exploring new places and meeting people from different cultures, yet he always returned to Ibadan, to the family that had come to mean so much to him. Each visit felt less like an obligation and more like a reunion with people who anchored his heart. Emenike's travels took him to places he had only read about, villages in northern Ghana, the bustling markets of Morocco, the serene beaches of Zanzibar. Each journey was a new adventure, filled with stories and experiences that fed his soul. But no matter how far he ventured, he always carried a part of his family with him, often sending postcards and photos to Chioma and the children. One night, while sitting on a beach in Zanzibar, watching the waves crash against the shore, Emenike's phone buzzed. It was a message from Chioma, the children miss you. They've been asking when you're coming home. Emenike smiled, a warmth spreading through him. Home. The word no longer felt heavy, as it once had. Now, it carried with it a sense of belonging. He typed out a quick reply, tell them I'll be home soon. As he sat there, watching the moonlight dance on the water, Emenike reflected on how much his life had changed since Dyke's death. He had once felt trapped, burdened by the weight of tradition and obligation, but now, those same ties felt like lifelines. He had learned that family wasn't something that held you back, it was something that grounded you, gave you strength, and reminded you of who you were. When he returned to Ibadan a few weeks later, he was greeted with the usual excitement from the children. They rushed to hug him, bombarding him with questions about his travels and showing him the new things they had learned in school. Emenike cherished these moments, knowing that each time he left, he would carry these memories with him. Chioma, as always, was calm and steady. She had grown into her role as the head of the family business, and it was clear that the elders had come to respect her capabilities. The tension that had once existed between them had dissipated, replaced by a quiet understanding that they were partners in more ways than one. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Chioma handed Emenike a small envelope. "This came for you earlier today," she said. Emenike opened the envelope, revealing a letter from an old acquaintance, inviting him to a business conference in London. The opportunity excited him, but it also made him pause. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to leave so soon. "You should go," Chioma said, reading the hesitation on his face. "I know, but," Emenike trailed off, glancing at the children playing in the yard. "I don't want to miss anything here." Chioma smiled softly. "You won't miss anything. You'll be back, just like always. And we'll be waiting for you." Her words reassured him, but something else lingered in the back of his mind. As much as he loved traveling, a part of him wondered if he was finally ready to settle down, not just for a season, but for good. He had found freedom in his travels, but he had also found something deeper, a sense of purpose and belonging with Chioma and the children. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Emenike lay awake, thinking about his next steps. The life he had built was one he never could have predicted, and yet, it felt like the life he was always meant to have. He had traveled, explored, and lived out his dreams, but he had also come to realize that true freedom wasn't just about escaping, it was about finding a place to belong. The next morning, Emenike made a decision. He would go to the conference in London, but this time, it wouldn't be an escape. It would be an opportunity, a chance to expand the family business, to create something lasting for his children's future, and to take Chioma's hard work to new heights. He was no longer running away from anything, he was running towards something. Chioma was supportive, as always, helping him pack and encouraging him to make the most of the opportunity. But this time, as Emenike boarded the plane, he felt a shift within himself. He wasn't living with the same restless energy that had once driven him to explore every corner of the world. Instead, he felt grounded, secure in the knowledge that no matter where he went, he had a home to return to. The conference in London was a success, and Emenike made valuable connections that would benefit the family business. But as much as he enjoyed the experience, he found himself longing to return to Ibadan sooner than expected. The thrill of traveling had been replaced by a deeper desire to be with his family, to build something lasting with them. When he finally returned home, Emenike knew that his days of wandering aimlessly were behind him. He had found what he was looking for, not in the far reaches of the world, but in the quiet moments spent with the people he loved. Chioma greeted him at the door, her smile warm and welcoming. "How was London?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "It was good," Emenike replied, stepping inside. "But it's even better to be home." Chioma laughed softly, shaking her head. "I never thought I'd hear you say that." "Neither did I," Emenike admitted, his heart full as he looked around the house, the home he had once felt so disconnected from, but now cherished more than anything. As the days turned into weeks, Emenike found himself more involved in the family's day-to-day life. He continued to travel for business, but each time, he returned to Ibadan with a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't known was possible. He had found the balance that had once eluded him, a life filled with adventure, purpose, and love. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Emenike looked around the table at Chioma, the children, and the life they had built together. He realized that the ties that once felt like chains were now the very things that anchored him, giving him the freedom to truly live. Chioma caught his eye and smiled, as if sensing his thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Emenike smiled back, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. "I'm thinking that I finally found where I belong." And in that moment, Emenike knew that he had found his true freedom, not in the far-off places he had once dreamed of, but in the ties that connected him to the people he loved. He was home, and that was all that mattered. The end.